Hello, welcome back to Emperor's Path. My name is SBJ and welcome to, I guess it's the November update. Good morning, I hope you're well if you're watching this. If you've come back and you're a returning subscriber, thank you very much. However, if you are someone who is new and this is the first time you've seen my channel, thank you very much once again. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button because it does massively help not only the channel, but my ego as well. So there's been a lot that's changed on the layout since the last video I did. The last video I did, we had trains running, which was fantastic. It was great for my mental health, let's be honest, because having trains running in the background was one of the biggest things that I wanted from my layout. So actually having trains now running around constantly is great. I work just up the other end of the office, both for weathering and for my daytime job, and it's just really refreshing to just have the clickety-clack of trains going round and round and round. So I really enjoy that. As well as getting trains running, I kept meaning to film more updates as time went on, but what happened was I'd start something and then whilst I was waiting for it to dry, I found that I was starting something new, so nothing ever really got finished before we're at the stage that we're at now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk you through everything that I've been up to on the main section of the layout, and yeah, we're going to go from there. So the first thing I'm going to talk about for the update is I finally managed to complete a new piece of rolling stock. Those of you who have followed the channel for a while will know that I love my EMUs, and perfect timing. Coming through the tunnel and under and over the bridge now is my class 455. I've been working on this for about a year. I bought some spares and repair class 150s. Those of you who don't know, the class 150 DMU shares the same chassis and body shell style as the class 455. The only difference is the 455 equivalents have additional coaches in the middle. So in order to try and kit bash this together, I effectively bought the two 150 kits over the course of, I'd say probably 6 months or so, just scouring eBay, trying to find the really cheap kits that people don't think they're going to be able to fix. And then also bought two additional body shells from the Bachmann Spares website. Now the reason I bought the two body shells from the Bachmann Spares website is because there's two variants of body shells that you can get, and there's one which means that you don't have to cut and shut any of the body shell because of the additional windows that you get on the 455. I spent the better part of the last year effectively cutting and shutting and gluing and trying to get the kit all together, and whilst it's still got a few little bits that I need to do on it, I've managed to get it painted to the point where the body shells can go back on the chassis. Most of the work that's on the chassis is done all bar weathering. Most of the bits on the model that needed doing was the painting and getting all of the body shells put back together. I've got a few little bits that need to be done on the actual chassis, and that's putting all of the underframe detail on there. The details on the 150s versus the 455s are very different. I also need to make sure that I put the electric shoe pickups on the unit so that they can get contact with the third rail so that they can actually run. Those of you who don't know, the 455 is a suburban style unit that is still operating on our network now. There's various guises of it. I've chosen to model the 4559. The reason I chose to do that is because the body shells are almost exactly the same as the class 150, barring an additional window on the driver's end door cab, and the most common version of the 455 that people see is the one that's got the big horn section up the top. Because I didn't want to have to remodel the actual cab ends of the 150, I chose not to model that. I've chosen to model 5920. It's a 4-car unit. I really like it. I'd quite like to get a sound decoder for it one day, but it's not essential right now. If you'd like to see a more in-depth look at the 455, you can check out my videos on posts on Instagram. Alternatively, if you leave a comment down below asking for more details and more pictures and videos of the 455, I can show you how to do it. So visually a lot has changed down this end of the layout, so just talking about everything that's gone on. So one of the more important things you can probably see is that there's definitely a lot of greenery up this end of the board now, which is great. Visually it looks so much more impressive to me rather than just the baseboard side of it. I got a little bit carried away, if I'm being really honest, because I wasn't going to be doing any of this until I'd sorted out little sections that I wanted to do. I had put in a third rail arcing and sparking, and whilst actually filming this video, I discovered that it's no longer working. Now, I did do a video on arcing and sparking and how to create it for your third rail layouts. Now, what's supposed to happen is the loco that's coming up is meant to cross over this little black bit here, and it should flash, which I did a video on, and I was really happy with. However, as I've got to film this particular layout update, it's not working. Now, I've replaced the batteries in the battery pack to see if that was it, and still nothing. I've used stronger magnets over the top to see if it's working. So that brings me on to the next thing that I've done, which is I've ballasted. Now, I can only assume that somewhere in between me ballasting and gluing, something has happened to the circuitry, which means that it's no longer working. Now, if I'm really honest, now that I've put the ballast on there and it's dried, I don't really want to have to pull it all up again just to get the little arcing and sparking working. So what I've decided at this moment, and this is only within the last 5 minutes or so, is I've decided to just leave it for now, and that's something I can come back to at a later date. So the first thing down this end that I've started working on is what will eventually become the M27. It's going to be the Scenic brake for the layout. It's a really good Scenic brake because it effectively means that I've got an already naturally occurring bridge in the area that's perfect, and I'll be able to sort of put lots of cars on the top if I want, or leave it blank. It's quite difficult because whereas when you see cars and rolling and die-cast vehicles on the roads around a layout, usually you can sort of say they're stuck at traffic lights or things like that, but above here will be what is effectively the very beginning of the M27 motorway, so it's usually quite busy. So I don't really know how to model it from a car point of view, but definitely from a modelling point of view, it's a great area to start Scenic brake. I have had people from the railway who work in the Portsmouth area contact me and said, well, you do know that the points start on that particular section of bridge? And the answer is yes, I'm well aware of it. If you look at pictures of this particular part of Ports Creek Junction, what happens is as it goes under the bridge, you'll have one set of tracks that goes off towards the west, towards Southampton, and then you'll have another set of tracks that go east towards Havant, and then it can effectively at Havant go off towards Waterloo, or it can go off towards Brighton. When I built this board, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. I effectively wanted to have just a running line of track, and the idea was there was not going to be any sidings or points work or anything like that. It was going to be mostly to focus on the bridge. So I know, and apologies to anyone who really wants me to do this, I'm not going to, let's be really honest. I know that the points work effectively starts about here, and they're very gentle points, but they go under the bridge and then they fan out. I'm not going to be putting that in, so apologies in advance. As I say, I wanted to keep this area nice and simple. We are talking that another 12 inches and I could have put some points in and it wouldn't have looked too bad, but I've decided to just have the straight lines on there, and you're going to have to use your imagination. Also, you can see I've started working on the other Scenic part, so as well as doing the ballasting, I've been working on the groundwork and the ground cover. Now, I had sculptor moulded all around this area prior to the move, so this was all done before the installation. However, I was never fully happy with the area that the van and the red car are sat on. It was a little bit bumpy, and that bit, although it does have a gravel texture to it in real life, it's a fairly smooth area in the grand scheme of things, and I didn't want it to be as lumpy bumpy as it was actually appearing. So a couple of weeks ago I went out and bought some new sculptor mould for another part of this section, and I used a little bit just to sort of smooth out and even out that particular surface on there, and I think it looks much better for it. That cured, and I've just painted it a grey just so that it gives you the idea of that's going to be the car park section. So just behind that van we've got the fencing as well, and that fencing effectively comes up and goes around there, and it mirrors it on the other side. Now, because the points are there in real life, there are two massive junction box areas, so you have some pillar boxes on either side. Now, I'm going to be putting those in just so that there's something visual that you can see from there. Whether or not there's anything that should be there because the points don't exist anymore, who knows. Now, on the far side, you can see that there's shrubland, bushland. This is very similar to what's already on that side of the Ports Creek Junction. and it effectively, just out of shot of that, there used to be an old pillar box from World War II. That's out of shot in my mind. I was trying to work out whether I could fit it in, because it's obviously quite a nice thing to have, but at the same time I was like, well, actually it is a lot further away than the area that I'm modelling on it, so I decided to not and go for a bit of shrubland up there as well. As you can see, I have started to paint along the bridge as well, so I'm just going to pan round. And you can see I have started working on colouring the floor of the river, or the creek, or the moat, however you want to call it. It's been called many things over the years. So I have done that. I've painted it about 3 or 4 times over the last month or so. I tried doing various different techniques that I've used before, and I just couldn't get it to sit right. And then I went out and bought a tester pot from B&M, which is the colour Mocha, which is one of these. And it's sort of like almost an orangey brown. There's a tester pot there. And effectively I started using that, and it massively changed how the creek bed looked, and I really liked the colour for it. So what I did was I painted that, and then I painted the whole floor bed that colour, and then I went to the very centre parts that would be the deeper sections of the river, and what I did was I painted those black. And then what I did was I started moving towards the outsides and using greys, blacks and browns to sort of try and create the depth, but also try and get it naturally occurring. What I'm going to do in a couple of weeks is I'm going to be tidying that up with some airbrushing to try and make it blend in a little bit better, so that when the resin goes on there eventually, it won't look as obvious. But I'm quite happy with how it looks. It definitely looks great in pictures of this particular part of the layout, so that works for me. So on the actual bridge side of it, apart from installing third rail on the bridge, which is another thing I've done over the last couple of months, is there is third rail basically going all the way along on a panning shot. And the only part that doesn't have it is, let's see if I can get this right with my finger, is the backtrack here doesn't have third rail on this particular section. I basically ran out of the bits that I wanted to use, but I can install that before or after ballasting, so I think that's something I'm going to be working on shortly. So that brings me on to this section down here. Now this little slope that's on the foreground, on the what would be considered the south side of the bridge, I was never really happy with how that gradient worked. It was almost like a very aggressive hill, and if you look at pictures, in certain parts, and depending on the tide, the mounds almost come right up to the top here, and they sort of come down really, really gradually. Now, from a modelling point of view, I didn't think that I wanted it to be as gradual as that, because it would feel like the bridge was too long for how deep it actually might be. So I've sort of met myself in the middle. I put more sculpt mould on top of the parts that were already there and brought it a lot further out. So I think it used to come somewhere to here. Instead, I've made a much more gradual hill and brought it to here. Now, the reason this bit hasn't been painted is because this particular section, and the bit I'm going to show you at the back in a second, have taken forever to cure. And I think that's something to do with the fact that the temperature of the weather that we're having at the moment, but also the sheer mound of sculptor mould that I was putting on there. So I think it's just taking a long time to dry. But versus the north side of the bridge where I did it as the car park, that dried quite quickly. This side's taking a while to dry, and I think probably after I finished videoing this I'm going to paint it, because I've sort of come up here with a couple of hours to spare today. So looking over across on the far side, I'll quickly address the other sculptor mould area. So I had the same feeling where this bit I couldn't work out, it didn't look right, how the transition between the edge to the river had gone. Now on that particular side in the photos, that is an aggressive stop, and there's some pictures of it where there's almost like a half concrete barrier halfway down. I decided not to do that, mainly because on that particular side you won't necessarily see it as much, but I have done a little bit of mounding on that far side to at least make it a little bit looks better scenically than what I had previously done. And then just addressing it at the back. Now, whilst I have used a lot of inspiration from pictures of Ports Creek Junction, one thing I have done on that particular section is I've used a little bit of poetic license to make the scene look a little bit more interesting than it actually is. Now, in real life, when you walk alongside this particular area of track, this is actually flat behind it. all along here, completely flat. You walk up and there's sort of a mound of trees here, but it all stays flat right up until here to where it suddenly stops, goes up to where the old fort is, and there's loads of trees and stuff growing up there. Now, to add more little cameos in the scene, I wanted to make it where effectively the walking trail that would be off scene down here can come along to here and almost do a little walking trail that goes all the way up here. I might make it where there's like a little picnic bench or a little stop there so that people who have walked along there might stop to look in the river or watch the trains go through. But the idea is have a little pathway that curves up here, goes up here, and effectively could go on top of the bridge. Now, in real life, the bridge was closed off to the general public for safety, but I mean, in this particular timeline, I think I'm going to make it where effectively the walking trail comes up here and they can walk along here, have a nice little walk, and then rejoin down the other side. That's not something that was actually in use on the Ports Creek Junction, but I feel like it would be a nice little cameo to have some like walkers and bits like that, because whilst I do have a little bit in the foreground I could start putting people in, I wanted to make it so that there's a reason why those people were there. So creating a little walking path on top of that bridge is what I wanted to do. Now, when I installed this mound at the back, there was effectively nothing there. It was completely flat, and the sculptor mold that I did purchase has mostly been used on there. So the back scene was originally on, but I didn't want the sculptor mold to adhere to it to the point where I couldn't remove it and paint the back scene later. So what I did, I had the back scene on, and from the bottom all the way to the top, I put cling film on there. By putting the cling film on there, it meant that any of the sculptor mold that attached to it wouldn't actually stick to the back, but it meant that it would still form that shape for the back scene to attach to and bits like that, and still form all of the bits I needed it to. After that had dried, I mean, this has been like this for about a week, at least a whole week it's been up there, and it's still not fully cured. But after a couple of days, it had gone solid enough that taking off the back scene didn't adjust the shape of the mound. I've done a very similar thing as well with that piece of cardboard that you can see at the top, so this bit. So I put a piece of cardboard there to act as a barrier between the bridge and that little mound. The reason was I'm not ready to have the bridge non-removable at the moment. I still need to do the ballast that's underneath the bridge and onwards, and I still need to do the third rail. So I wanted it to still be a removable piece. So that's why that little cardboard piece was put in there, so I could lift that section up, and it means that it wouldn't affect either the bridge or let's see if I can put this in there, the bridge or the mound whilst it was drying. Now, there will be a gap in there eventually that I'll fill in, but for the main mound section, I wanted to at least get that pretty much set into a particular shape so that I can start putting and painting bits on there as well. Likewise, in the foreground, just before the tracks, I've added the cable trunking pots. Those are courtesy of Bunter's Yard. I really like what Dave's done there. He sort of amalgamated lots of different various kits that other people do. The actual cable trunking troughs are 3D printed, but the lids for it are all MDF or cardboard that he's laser cut. So it's like a best of both worlds kind of thing. So I put the actual cable troughing bases in, and I'll put the tops on just before I start weathering. So this little section down here, I've been quite pleased with this because it was something that I did whilst I was waiting for other parts to dry. Now, that foreground area, I actually sifted some old soil that I'd used from my old house, and I dried it out and put it in, I'd sifted it and put it into a jar. And that was a little tip I'd used from L Town of Boulder Creek Railroad. And it was really handy for putting on as like a first layer on the ground there. So all around here, there's touch-ups that need doing, but effectively this entire section was done with soil first, and it added a great colour, and it allowed me to sort of appreciate what colour, that sounds really silly, but soil looks in real life. A lot of the time you get it where you'll model soil when you're using it for model railways, but it's always really, really light. So I've used real soil, and it makes me appreciate how dark it actually is. So once I'd done that, I added in all of these sort of foam shrubs that I made a couple of months ago with my daughter. We used it as a little afternoon project, and it was for my own benefit really, but it was really, really handy to do. I've used those, and I've sort of built up massive mounds in certain areas where they just grow wild in the real life thing. and I think it looks really, really good and effective. And in the real life area as well, let me just take these trees out. Just before the actual bridge section, this does grow completely wild and it's out of control, and I love it, and I think it's a really, really good thing to have there. Now I'm going to add some sort of flower pieces later down the line, and maybe some orange flowery bits just to give it that autumn feel, because I'm modelling an autumn style layout just as the leaves are turning, but not all of the trees are doing it, and the leaves are still around a little bit as well. But it's a nice little area. It's a really lovely place to watch the trains come in and go now, and I think where you've got the very, James and I talked about it on the podcast, but you've got a very urban feel on the north side of the bridge, and on the south side it definitely feels like a more rural area, despite the fact that that's the section that's actually joining Portsea Island. So I thought that quite interesting. I've added the same shrubs up the top of the bridge as well. Once again, it's completely overgrown in real life, and I do want to have some essence of that with my version. Mine's just going to have sort of a walking path that goes along it as well at the top. Now this is using an old Metcalfe bridge that I used on the old layout. I didn't necessarily want to get rid of it because there was nothing wrong with it. I'm going to weather it, distress it, add lots of trees and foliage to it as well. And eventually I'm going to fill in this section as well, and fill in the bit at the back when I put the back seam back on. Here's just another look from another angle of how this particular area looks. And as I say, adding the foliage and bits like that, I probably jumped ahead of what I was supposed to be doing, but it certainly adds a really nice feel to this particular section of the layout. And when you look down the bridge, you can see all the bits that I've done this month so far as well. Talking about the types of scenes and the shots that you can get by doing all of this now, this edging bit really needs tidying up, and I'm going to get a piece of ply to do that eventually. But I painted it a black, which didn't take very well, but it definitely has a look. But being able to see the trains come across and looking at it from this point of view, I've obviously got my light attached to my camera that's highlighting it from this angle, but when you've got it coming down from above and you've got the back scene on there, I think it's going to add a really interesting look to this particular point of the layout. I've added a few little touches. There's a little bit more foliage that I've put up against here, but that's going to be even more in the future. And then also, people breaking onto the railway lines is definitely not a new thing. And I've seen it before where people sort of effectively cut and bend particular poles as on the fencing. And if you look closely, you can see I've tried to model it where some little cheeky beggars have come along and they've broken a hole in the fence, trying to probably steal some copper cable or anything really. But the idea is I'm going to have some shrubberies there, but I'm going to have it where you can see that people have clearly hacked away, and that's how they break their way onto the train lines. But I thought it might be a nice little touch to have there, because you see it regularly where people have broken the fences so that they can gain access. This is particularly one of my favourite areas to sit and watch the trains come in on the layout, because not only do you have it where you're looking through the shrubs and stuff like that, and you can get lower than the track, or you can get the same level as the track, or you can go slightly higher, but it gives you this really nice picture when you look through the trees and you can see trains just sort of coming down the layout. I really, really like that. It's something I never had on the old layout, and it's something that I'm really glad I've got on this particular layout so far. And that's only going to grow as I add more and more things to it as well. All in all, I've really, really enjoyed working on the layout the last month or so. It's been nice to see the scenic area of this particular bit grow. The only time constraint I've had is where, unfortunately, I'm relying on the weather and drying time, and although I've got the heating on, it's still cold outside, and it's probably the coldest I've known it in November for a very, very long time. But being able to just sit from my desk, turn around and watch trains going across the bridge has always been something I've enjoyed since we first got trains running, and I can say that I'm enjoying it just as much now as I did a month or two ago when we first got trains properly running. Who knows, that might change in 6 months or so, but that's how model railway people's minds work, isn't it? So with that, that's pretty much all of the updates that I have for you on the layout for this month. I do try and do a monthly update, but if something doesn't happen, I don't do it, or I might just lose control of myself and do lots and lots of things and then forget about it. So I've been SPJ from Emperor's Path. If you do want to hear more of what I'm up to, you can listen to myself and my friend James from the Western Signalman on the Model Rail Replacement podcast. And if you have anything that you want us to do in an episode, please let us know. Otherwise, thanks very much. Take care. YouTube's going to suggest a video that it thinks you like now. Bye!